To unpack the new cabinet, I'm now joined by political analyst Daniel Silk. Daniel, many thanks for your time this evening. I think I'm going to start with the biggest surprise, Patricia de Lille making it onto that cabinet. Do you think this is a ploy by the ruling party to gain back the Western Cape?
Well, I think there can be all sorts of ulterior motives here. The one I'd like to suggest that is the prime motive is that we're seeing we haven't seen this for a long time in the ANC, a willingness to look beyond just the ANC for ideas and for efficiencies. Whether you support Mrs. de Lille or not, this seems to be an attempt to claw out some sort of contribution from the opposition, from outside of the rather narrow and myopic confines very often of the ANC. And by taking in an opposition MP of relatively high profile, it does indicate that the president is willing to consider new ideas. Now, the question will be, I suppose, for Mrs. de Lille, whether she finds that to be really the case during her term of office. But I agree, one must also look at the possibility of reeling Mrs. de Lille in to the ANC sphere of influence and possibly therefore using her in future against the DA in the Western Cape. We shouldn't rule that out.
One of the things that's going around on social media at the moment is the fact that cabinet is still bigger than it was in 1994. And I just want to get a sense of this consolidated cabinet. Do you think that the president has done the best he could have?
Look, I think we could have seen a lot more rationalization. I think we didn't see enough merging of departments. I think there are far too many deputy ministers still floating around. And clearly this was, yet another attempt at pacifying the various divergent interests within the ANC, and also, to be honest, providing a certain amount of patronage positions to many of those who are largely now within the Ramaphosa sphere of influence. And I think that's the crucial sort of aspect to me about this announcement. It didn't have any great excitement in it in terms of new blood, so to speak, but it was a consolidation for President Ramaphosa of his support base within the ANC. And as we move to some difficult times in policy making and in implementation in South Africa, Ramaphosa needs all the help he can get. And if you had to add on a few of those deputy ministers in order to keep them on his side, so be it, I suppose, for the foreseeable future.
I just want to get your sense. You do say it's not a lot of new blood that's made it onto the cabinet, but he did say that he wanted to appoint a cabinet with experience and provide a sense of continuity. We've seen in those critical portfolios, we do have that sense of continuity and stability. But in terms of experience, what would you make of those appointments?
I think that overall there is experience. The question really is not so much in terms of the personalities, because I think most of the personalities that are there have got experience in government in many capacities. The question is whether Ramaphosa can crack a new whip within the ANC. It's not so much to me about the numbers in the cabinet, about who gets which portfolio, although there is relevance to that. It is about whether we are going to see real shifts in structural policy in South Africa. Will the president be prepared to restructure the state-owned enterprises and take on, for example, COSATU as we rationalize some of the excess supply of labor that we have in those state-owned enterprises? And for that, he needs COSATU ministers within the cabinet, and he needs to keep on their good side so that he can negotiate a settlement going forward. And those are going to be the crucial issues to me that are more important. If the cabinet is that experienced or not, the president is going to have to lead on this, and the cabinet is going to have to at least fulfill the obligations that the president holds them to.
Yeah, and I mean, apart from restructuring those state-owned entities, he did also talk about performance agreements, and he's going to take a hard stance on ministers that just don't perform. You've mentioned the level of power that he has. Do you think that when it comes to dealing with ministers or cracking the whip, as you said earlier, he's got that clout?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. The proof will be in the pudding, as the old saying goes. We've heard about performance agreements before within government. We haven't really seen them kept. We've seen, we have seen ministers come and go very often not because they haven't performed, but very often because there are political considerations to reshuffling them. So I think the real test of the Ramaphosa administration over the course of the next year to 18 months will be whether he does crack the whip sufficiently. Don't forget, the promise of the new dawn is going to be scrutinized every step of the way, and his cabinet represents that promise. The cabinet is the symbolism, is the first act of real symbolism of the new dawn of President Ramaphosa. And if a cabinet minister falls by the wayside, commits some sort of transgression in any way, is inefficient or says the wrong things, it's going to come back to haunt President Ramaphosa pretty quickly. So he's got to certainly crack the whip going forward, and he will be tested on the performance now of this new cabinet.
Right, Daniel, I'm very interested to know your thoughts. The head of the ANC Women's League, Bathabile Dlamini, not making it onto the list. What do you think this means? Do you think some feathers may be rattled given her position in the party?
Yes, I think he's taken a degree of political risk here. Don't forget, the president has taken some political risk with appointing Didi Mabuza back as deputy president, and he's even taken political risk by keeping Pravin Gordhan in, at least at this stage, in the cabinet. So it's not a cabinet without political risk. He seems to have been prepared to take on the Women's League on the issue of Mrs. Dlamini, but I think that the body of evidence that is stacking up against her really does provide the president with a body of evidence to keep her out of cabinet, and I think he's made that calculated risk.
Daniel, with your engagements with investors going forward, what will you be telling them about this appointment? Are you optimistic about those economic and political reforms that we need to be seeing to see a growing South Africa?
Well, look, I'm optimistic that there's a window of opportunity that we haven't had in South Africa now for a number of years. And on that basis, I think investors are going to buy in to the promise of change in South Africa. But investors have been hurt by watching South Africa over the last decade or so. They've become skeptical and cynical, frankly, like many South Africans and many domestic investors have become. And they're going to be looking for hard-nosed action. There's no real room for sentiment here. The promises of better days ahead are going to have to be accompanied by real reform on the ground. And I think that will be the test to see whether we do have sustainable foreign direct investment from sensible investors who should consider South Africa as a good investment option and should consider this country as a tremendous growth opportunity into our neighboring states and other parts of the continent. But there's competition out there for investment dollars, and South Africa is going to have to rise to the occasion when faced with that competition elsewhere on the continent.
South Africa is going to have to rise to that competition indeed. Thank you very much for your time this evening, Daniel. I've been speaking there to political analyst Daniel Silk.